Okay, so if stereotypes and prejudices are harmful and not always true, why do we have them? Where did they come from? Well, a couple different reasons. The first is that humans rely on shortcuts all the time. This has been a common theme throughout a lot of our chapters. So we categorize information to speed up our processing. We talked about schemas in the memory chapter, just like learning, a schema for birds, that birds have feathers. That way, when you encounter something with feathers later on, you can quickly categorize it as a bird. Um, that's a simple example, but when those types of categories and their traits are oversimplified, you often get stereotypes. Um, and although stereotypes might be based on some element of truth, they're often really inaccurate because of the information they exclude, because people don't tend to accommodate new information into their schema of a particular trait or group. But in addition to that, we often misjudge correlations that uphold behaviors we think are true because of stereotypes. And this kind of goes along with ignoring information that doesn't fit, doesn't uphold those stereotypes. This is really similar, we talked about in the very first chapter, if you remember, a type of bias from the research methods unit called confirmation bias, where we pay attention to information that upholds our beliefs and ignore information that doesn't. So for instance, let's say we might overestimate the percentage of students who are Asian who do well at math because we have that stereotype that Asians are good at math. And we might underestimate the percentage of blondes who are good at math because blondes are dumb. So even if we're in a group where there are a bunch of blondes who are smart, or a bunch of Asians who are not good at math, you might ignore that information and focus on the one or two individuals that fit your belief. So confirmation bias is a huge reason that prejudices and stereotypes still exist. But also your direct experience, using one bad experience. So for instance, let's say I had one really horrible experience. I had one boring history professor in college. You might then develop a stereotype that history is boring. History professors are not great teachers or whatever, I don't know. But just using one experience with a person from a particular group to then define the rest of the group. And then lastly, we talked about this just with like forming attitudes, learning from the people around you. So if your parents or your friends all believe a certain thing, you're likely to pick up that same point of view. I know that's true personally for me growing up. I, wasn't super politically active at all. I kind of just believed whatever my parents believed. And it wasn't until I became an adult and left the house that I was like, oh, I have my own opinions about things. So, we often learn prejudices and stereotypes from the people around us. It's the only thing we know. Now, there are some negative outcomes of stereotypes, and I know that sounds obvious, but we're going to talk about a couple phenomena that I think are pretty cool. Cool not in a good sense, but cool in a fascinating sense. The first is called stereotype threat. And this is a phenomenon in which the fear of confirming a particular stereotype, a negative stereotype, actually leads you to act in accordance with that stereotype. So let me show you an example. There's a famous study from '95 conducted at Stanford University where they grouped groups of Black students and white students, and they split them up, and they wanted to give them a GRE, which is an exam similar to like ACT or SAT, but for grad school. So there's a stereotype that maybe white students are better at test taking than Black students are. Stereotype again. So they wanted to see how this would play out in a sort of experiment. What they ended up doing is they varied what they told the participants the test was for. So in the experimental group, They told the participants explicitly, this test is going to determine how smart you are. This measures your intelligence. Whereas the control group got a, totally unimportant type of reasoning. Like, this test is being used just to understand factors about problem solving. So nothing about you, we're just doing it. So we're inducing basically like this threat here, whether it is actually measuring how smart you are or whether it doesn't really matter to you. So which group do you think would do better? The group that was told it measures your intelligence, or the group that was told it was just being used to understand problem solving? And then further, students who are Black or students who are white?